Weapon systems in games are kind of strange. Every game that has them uses them differently based on what the game needs them to do. But how should games implement their weapon systems to complement the type of game they are? Games like Baldur's Gate 3, Pillars of Eternity, and Witcher 3 do this by having common weapons be tools of immersion rather than an option for you to consider in combat. Every enemy you defeat has a weapon that you can pick up. And that's neat, but makes the weapons they drop extremely boring. Whereas JRPGs and turn-based games like them do things differently. In Persona, and unfortunately my new favorite turn-based game, Chained Echoes, weapons are just stat sticks. They just make the player stronger and that's it. Chained Echoes makes me sad as well because it's honestly the only major complaint I have with the game. Getting a new weapon feels... How do I word this? It feels like nothing. I'm not happy, I'm not sad, I'm not even really disappointed. Actually, let me rant about this for a second because it's really bad and I think it's the best example I can find for a game doing a weapon system poorly. As of 30 hours into Chained Echoes, I can honestly say that I've used the gym system twice. So how it works, I think, is that weapons have gym slots. Okay, I hear you say. Many games do this, to which I say, yes, so how is it so bad here? The way these gyms work is they are made up of 3 parts: the level of the gym, the purity of the gym, and the amount of slots it will take up in your gear. You can combine gyms to make them stronger, so putting a level 2 gym into a level 3 gym will make it level 5. Simple so far. But upon upgrading the gym, the purity of the gym goes down, and once it hits 0, you can no longer upgrade that gym. It gets locked into the level it is when you upgrade it. This makes me, the player, never want to upgrade, because as I go further into the game, I'll supposedly find better gyms to make higher level ones by upgrading. And every time I get a new weapon or armor, I need to take the gyms, or more likely gym singular, I have in it and put it into a new weapon or armor. Every piece of gear I've found has 2 slots for gyms at the start. Most gyms that are mostly decent need 3 slots. So I then also have to upgrade the weapon or armor to even put the gym into it. Now, you're not getting a new weapon every 30 minutes, but if you play the game at an average rate, you're likely to replace your weapon every play session or every other play session ad nauseum. And repeating myself from the start of this rant, I've barely used this system. I think the only gym I consistently use is giving my bard like 10% more health in his armor. So not even is the system not good, it's not even worth using because I've went through most of the game without touching it. It's just a time sink and a headache to worry about, so I've just not worried about it and have ignored it, which isn't a good weapon system. And it's a departure from the very games that helped inspire it, such as Final Fantasy. Using my favorite Final Fantasy as the first example, Final Fantasy IX has every weapon have its own unique passive ability that you can permanently learn from it for using it for X amount of time. Which sounds like a good system, because it makes every weapon have its own intrinsic value to the player. But there's a big issue with it. You have to use the weapon for a certain amount of time before you can permanently learn the ability from it. And it makes you as the player need to change your weapons and armor semi-frequently just to learn new skills, which can be annoying if you just equip them and carry on with the story because you could be using weapons and armor that aren't great for your character, but you just want to get the skill from it so you're less powerful for the story fights up ahead. And if you just take the time to learn every new skill you come across from every weapon, your average runtime for the game is going to be noticeably longer doing monotonous random encounters. It's something Final Fantasy VII does very similarly to 9, but in a different way. Each weapon is also unique. It has its own attack and magic stats, but it also has a different amount of materia slots for you to put in your abilities for your party. So instead of learning new abilities from the weapon themselves, you're putting abilities into the weapons that you then level separately. And this works good for party customization, and as much as I personally don't like the materia system in Final Fantasy VII, I think it's the best way Square Enix has implemented weapons. And since turn-based games can't make weapons unique in the way an action game can, leaning into giving the player agency to make their party function how they want to is a really good way to do it. Unfortunately, with all turn-based games, they suffer from the same issue. As you progress through the game, you're gonna find a weapon that is just superior in every way to what you're currently using, so you do lose that bit of agency just by progressing through the game. It's something action games have a very clear advantage in. And here I was gonna talk about how action games have also got pretty boring weapons, but I kind of like a lot of them recently. I was going to use Elden Ring as a prime example of weapon bloat in action games, and it definitely has bloat, and there are issues with the weapon design. I mean, if you're casually playing the game, most of the time you summon, invade, or get summoned for co-op, it's extremely likely you'll see people using one of a few select weapons, but people only using these few weapons doesn't mean there is no choice for the players. Nothing is stopping people from using the other 309 weapons in the game. It's a better to have it and not need it approach rather than a thought-out mechanical use. I also want to argue for Elden Ring's case that having many weapons of the same category are more a vehicle for lore rather than the devs wanting you to use something like the Hand-Axe all game when you find one, which makes sense for the esoteric storytelling FromSoft has. But it wouldn't work for a game like The Lies of P, where weapons are scarce. Well, relatively, there's still 40 of them, but they're all unique. Most come in two parts, the hitting part and the holding part. You can mix and match what weapons have what parts. If you want to put a wrench on a stick, you can. If you want to put a giant anime axe on a dagger hilt, you can. Lies of P gives a unique agency to the player, where they can customize weapons how they want and play with the playstyle they want. And it's fun just to play with customizing the weapons, it doesn't have to be for a purpose. And in a similar way, games like Nier also have fewer weapons so they can act unique from each other, having different passives, the amount of attacks they can perform in a combo, etc. Like Elden Ring, they also come with their own lore, adding to the narrative of the game as well. And it's what all three of these systems do well. They make me want to try the other weapon categories that I might not have tried yet. I think Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree, for all the faults I personally have with it, did really good in this front. With all the unique weapon categories they added in, like the perfume bottles, the milady, the new fist weapons where you can punch. They're just fun weapons to try and make a build around. Which leads into what I dislike about the approach Lies of P and Elden Ring takes. Where if I find a weapon late into the Shadow of the Erdtree or late into the game of Lies of P, if I want to use the weapon in any meaningful amount of way, I have to go to New Game Plus. And as someone who doesn't like New Game Plus in these types of games, really sucks. But it is a very hard thing to implement, balance, and most importantly, it's just my personal opinion. Which, speaking of personal opinions, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, you ever hear of them? Heck yeah, nice segue. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have a weapon system that's interesting. Is that the word? Yeah. Interesting. Now, I've personally gone on a roller coaster of emotions with the weapon system in these games. Playing Breath of the Wild, the first 20 or so hours, I was loving it, but then I found myself doing the, I don't need to use this good weapon here, I should save it for when I really need it thing, or the, I'll just run past these enemies, they're not worth the durability of the weapons I have thing. And then I found myself hating this system for a long time. But then, I didn't! What had changed was just my outlook on how the game works. Breath of the Wild, and to a lesser extent Tears of the Kingdom, just wouldn't work with indestructible weapons. You're not supposed to fight every monster you come across, and you're not supposed to save every weapon you find. I mean, hell, I didn't even fight all the enemies I came across in Elden Ring or Lies of P. You know, the game where combat is the core design pillar and selling point? Breath of the Wild, and to a lesser extent Tears of the Kingdom, are games about the world, finding what you can and using it to save the land and people of Hyrule. Doing that, you're going to break a few bokoblin bows, and yeah, even the cool katanas. But that's the point, they aren't precious, they're just tools to be used. This could very easily turn into a rant about hoarding special resources until you really need them, so I'll save that for a future video maybe, but it is a way to implement weapon systems by making them a currency the player can spend by using them in combat. Another interesting and alternative way you can make a weapon system is tie it to the player's skill directly. Cave Story does this by having the weapons in the world level up as you slay monsters and open certain containers, up to a maximum level of 3. The neat thing Cave Story does is upon taking damage, you lose essentially XP for the weapon you have out. When you take enough damage, the weapon levels down, making it play slightly differently, like slightly reducing the range, reducing damage, and so forth. The rate at which you lose weapon experience is typically slower than the rate at which you lose health, so you tend to die before your weapon fully downgrades, making the system less punishing than it sounds. The whole mechanic is designed to change the approach players take to the game. Instead of not taking damage because you'll die, you want to avoid damage to keep your rocket launcher at full power. If a boss switches between two phases, one phase where you can deal a lot of damage and one phase where you are mainly avoiding taking damage, you may want to switch to your less powerful weapon to avoid losing XP on your stronger one. It's such an extremely unique way to approach a system like this, and I really want to see more things like this going forward, where weapons are thought of as whole mechanics themselves instead of just damage-dealing sticks that will be replaced by a better one in X amount of hours. This is the thing that weapon systems and systems at large should do for a game. I think of it like Chekhov's gun, where if you're putting a weapon system into a game, why is it there? What does it add to the experience of playing the game? Do they change the player's moveset, letting them adapt in different ways, or are they stat sticks that you can add and remove other resources to that changes the way players can customize their characters and parties? That's what I think is unique and what I want to get across here. A good weapon system should let and even encourage players to experiment and push the system. Even skill-based games like Sekiro, which only has one core weapon for the player to use, still uses systems to let the player change their playstyle and equipment. Using the prosthetic arm, skill tree, and later on the mortal blade to replace what other games give you new weapons for. Systems like Sekiro's are what make bad systems like Chained Echoes stand out so much to me. Sekiro only has 10 prosthetic tools, so all of them feel unique and substantial to get and use. And this is in no way meant to compare these two games or how they do their weapon systems, it's just clear one was made to complement the game it was made for, while the other feels like it's checking off a checkbox in the systems your JRPG needs, #top 10, #innovative, #subscribe video. So whether you switch to every new weapon you find, only use one weapon to hunt monsters for thousands of hours, or make use of other mechanics that complement the weapon system, how you choose to interact with the system is and should be what the game aims to achieve. Giving you, the player, options to play the game in a way that complements your own unique playstyle and the game as an experience. I hope you enjoyed the little talk, and I hope it didn't get too rambly. I'm working on that. But if you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe. It helps the channel out, and it lets me know what kind of stuff people like to hear about. Otherwise, stay safe and bye-bye!